Hello, rock and roll rebels, and welcome to another episode of Ramble on with Rosie. I have a question for you today. Are you ready to rock steady? Because we will be discussing the debut album of the phenomenal British rock supergroup Bad Company, which is the best company to be keeping if you're asking me. So some backstory on this fine Bad Company that we're going to be keeping today. The band, before we launch into discussing the album, but the band was basically formed out of three separate other band's members, so hence why it's a supergroup. So there's two guys coming from the band Free, which has the big smash hit All Right Now. That would be Paul Rodgers, aka the voice of rock, and Simon Kirke, the drummer. And then you had Boz Burrell, who had sang and played bass in King Crimson, and then you had Mick Ralphs, who left Mott the Hoople, of All the Young Dudes fame. So that's like the four founding members of Bad Company. And they had a windfall in that they were signed by Led Zeppelin's Swan Song label, and they also got Led Zeppelin's manager Peter Grant to be their manager. So they were, the way was paved for them to be the huge success that they became. And it says something about Peter Grant's character that when he met with the band, well, he didn't tell them that he had showed up when they were rehearsing, and they got really pissed and played with a vengeance out of frustration while he was listening from outside of the hall where they were rehearsing in. And that was their audition, and so he agreed to take them on to Led Zeppelin's label and to manage them. And the management agreement was literally like, we're not even going to bother with contracts. Like, I'll give you a 6-month trial period based on a handshake, and then we'll write something up if that works out, which it clearly did. Bad Company was doing so well that they sold out a British tour with no single and no album out. Just the word of mouth of people talking about, like, hey, that guy from Free, or that guy from King Crimson, or that guy from Mott the Hoople is in this new band called Bad Company. Let's go see him. And they sold out the whole tour, headlining, playing places like the Hammersmith Odeon, like, not small pub venues, like, well-established, respected theater venues. So that just says loads there. But soon enough, they did get to record an album. Yet another Led Zeppelin connection. Led Zeppelin was supposed to be recording at the famed Headley Grange, which I discussed in my episode on Led Zeppelin's Untitled album at length there. So if you want to hear more about Headley Grange, go listen to that episode about the fourth Led Zeppelin album, because that's where it was recorded as well. Both these albums being recorded with Ronnie Lane's mobile recording studio. But anyways, Zepp was going to record at Headley Grange, but there's some variance here. I've heard it was John Paul Jones that was sick. I've also heard that it was John Bonham who was sick. But one of the two guys in the rhythm section of Led Zeppelin was ill, and so the mobile recording studio was sitting there at Headley Grange. The house was empty. Everything was ready to go. So Peter Grant gets on the line with the boys in Bad Company and is like, hey, go put down some tracks, while whichever John it is that's sick convalesces. And, they made an album in 10 days, which is astonishing in of itself, especially with the atmosphere of this album. It sounds like they had all the time in the world to record it, and were just four guys having a very fun time, very chill, relaxed vibes, and it's a great, great album because of that. And it's astonishing that they got it done in 10 days, because they literally had a couple tracks that didn't make it onto the album. So that's an average of over a track a day, because between the 8 tracks on the album and the 2 songs that were B-sides and the song Superstar Woman, which ended up being a total outtake, that's 11 tracks in 10 days. Pretty impressive there. And again, with Led Zeppelin and Bad Company's connection, I have to highlight this. Back when Paul Rodgers and Simon Kirke were in Free, so rewind about 6 months before Led Zeppelin formed, because Free predates Led Zeppelin by about 6 months. One young Robert Plant was contemplating this offer he had been given by one Mr. Page to come down and, his band. And so wanting to talk to somebody a little bit more knowledgeable, seeing as he's only like 18, 19 at this point, he goes and talks to one of the band members of Free after the concert, that band member being Paul Rodgers. And so he asks Paul a couple business questions, like, should I take a percentage, or, some sort of salary, and should I take up, this offer? And Paul Rodgers was like, well, Page has a really good name, with the Yardbirds and his session work, you should go for it. And I forgot which way he advised him on the financial matter, but point is, maybe there would have been no Robert Plant in Led Zeppelin had Paul Rodgers not advised him to join. I don't know, but it's interesting to think about, and funny how things come full circle, and now Bad Company's recording on Led Zeppelin's label at Headley Grange because Led Zeppelin couldn't make it to the Grange. So, very interesting twists of fate in the rock and roll world. However, fate was definitely with this album because it's just so astonishingly good. The atmosphere and ambiance in it is just, it's out of this world. Just on the title track alone, it's got such a feel. Like, the songs on Bad Company, especially the song Bad Company, aren't even songs. They're like an experience. Like, it takes in more of your senses than just your sense of hearing. So it's really good, and I appreciate it. And on that note, we will dig into the album track by track. We're going to start with the starting track, obviously, which is Can't Get Enough of Your Love, which was written by Mick Ralphs before he joined. He actually wrote it for Mott the Hoople, and either the other band members or the label that Mott was signed with turned it down. It very easily could have been one of the other band members, because by his own admission, Ian Hunter, the lead singer for Mott the Hoople, couldn't really sing the songs that Mick was writing for him, which is part of the reason why Mick left Mott the Hoople. The other contributing factor being is that they were going in less of a gritty blues-based direction and more of a, pop David Bowie influenced direction, which makes sense because David Bowie wrote their huge hit of All the Young Dudes for them. And so they were going that way, more pop and less underground, earthy sounds, as Mick Ralphs described it. And so Ian Hunter couldn't sing Can't Get Enough of Your Love, and so Mott the Hoople didn't do it. Fortunately, Paul Rodgers can sing the heck out of Can't Get Enough of Your Love, which he does. It's just a great rocker, an iconic rock and roll song. You can't get much more of just a total bangin' rocker than Can't Get Enough of Your Love. What's interesting, though, is that the introduction, the count-in at the beginning that Simon Kirke does, was not just there to, introduce the album with a countdown and, sound kind of cool. It was literally necessary because when they were recording it, they were all over the house, the Headley Grange house. Like, Simon Kirke himself was in the basement, Boz Burrell, the bass player, was over in the boiler room, and Mick and Paul were in the main living room with the guitar amps. So the only way for everybody to keep track of what was going, because they couldn't see each other, was, for Simon to count in the song so that they could hear it, and, come in when they were supposed to come in and start the song. So that's, interesting thinking about these people all over this old Victorian workhouse, recording a total bangin' rock and roll song, even if it is in the boiler room. But track 2, which is probably, I happen to like this track possibly even more than Can't Get Enough of Your Love. They're kind of similar in the fact that they're both very, bangin' rock songs, but it's Rocksteady, which is written by Paul Rodgers. And it's just got a standout vocal performance by him. I love it. To me, I feel it ranks up there as far as just earthy rock and roll, in your guts, power ballad of passion. I'm not even power ballad, but just power rock song of passion. To me, it ranks up there vocally. The vocal performance ranks up there with The Who's Love Reign Over Me, which is interesting because that song is off of Quadrophenia, which Nevison, the guy who was engineering this album and the other two Bad Company albums that followed, also did the sound engineering on The Who's Quadrophenia. But both Roger Daltrey's in Love Reign Over Me and Paul Rodgers' vocals in Rocksteady have that really just primal sound to them, for lack of better ways to put it. Like, it's just raw sounding and sounds great. However, a difference there between the two songs is that Rocksteady has like a whole band sound to it versus Love Reign Over Me, which has more of like a solo lonesome feel to it, like the vocals versus Rocksteady, which is like a whole bunch of dudes having a party versus just one dude. But on the topic of love, we will get to the third track, which is Ready for Love, which was written by Mick Ralphs while he was still in What the Hoople, so it's kind of similar situation, you can't get enough of your love. But to me, like, I was surprised when I read that Mick wrote it, because to me it sounds almost more like a Paul song, because it's got a real thoughtfulness to it, like a slow sort of, like, it's a love song, but it's got some depth, which Paul Rodgers is really good at writing, like, deeper love songs. I mean, yeah, some of them are just, your typical, rock and roll love song that doesn't have a lot of depth, but quite a few of Paul Rodgers' love songs do have depth. So I had assumed Ready for Love was a Paul song, but is in fact a Mick Ralphs song, which shows how well they complemented each other in their songwriting skills. Because, for them to be mistaken for each other, they clearly have a lot of similar background that they've built on and ways of viewing things. So they complemented each other very well with their songwriting skills. And to me, one of the reasons why I really enjoy Ready for Love is that, like I was saying, it's, a little deeper than your average rock love song. So it kind of makes you think and reflect. It's a very reflective song, which is almost a little incongruous because it's a very sensuous song. I mean, if you've ever watched the TV series Supernatural, they use it in an episode where the main character, Dean, has a girl in the backseat of his Impala, which totally fits the vibe of the song, melodically, but lyrically, it's like a really, you kind of have to, if you listen to the lyrics, you kind of have to wrestle with, it, especially if you're in situations like I've been, where you're like, oh, am I, ready to make another foray into the world of romance, and, how scared of this am I? So it's a very tender, thought-provoking love song versus your usual lyrical content in rock songs that are appropriate for the backseat of an Impala. But it's good, and I really enjoy some of the little, I don't know what it is, it's like plucking on his bass that Boz does. It's got a really unique sound to it, which, if you watch the documentary on Bad Company, they discuss how unique of a bass player Boz was. For one, he played a fretless bass, which is kind of interesting, and there's some other things that they cover, but, I feel like that little sort of twanging that he's doing with the bass in Ready for Love, and he does in another song on the album, kind of was part of the uniqueness. So that's really cool, and I enjoy the accent piano in Ready for Love. It just adds like an element of tenderness to the song, which just, reflects what's in the lyrics, too. The accent piano in Ready for Love is just lovely. Love it. Now, to track 4, and the last track on side A of the album, if you're listening to it on vinyl. Incidentally, you shouldn't listen to this album on any other format than vinyl, because, like, all that stuff I was talking about at the beginning with the ambience and atmosphere of the album is just amplified even more when you listen to it on vinyl. When you listen to it on vinyl, it's just, like I said, it goes beyond just your sense of hearing. It's like an experience. I mean, the songs are an experience even if they just come on the radio and it's a digital format, but that lovely vinyl format is all the more better. So if you're listening to Bad Company on vinyl, this will be the last track on side A, which is Don't Let Me Down. So don't let me down by listening to this album on anything other than vinyl. Just kidding. No, but seriously, if I was going to pick an album to, like, somebody just got a record player and an album they need to hear on vinyl because there's a very noticeable audible difference between the vinyl and the digital sound, I'm picking Bad Company. Now, back to track 4. Don't Let Me Down, which was written by both Paul Rodgers and Mick Ralphs together. It's good. Like, I'm not saying, it's not really a standout track, it's not one of the best, it's not one of the ones that get played, but it's not a bad song, and I really appreciate the gospel infusion they gave it with the female backup singers. And Paul's voice is at a more tender and soft sound than it is in other songs. It's a little bit more mellow, and so it's just a nice song. It's not particularly good or bad, just there, and a solid song. I mean, not every song on an album can be a total turn it up to 10 banger like most of the songs on this album are. So, flipping over the record to side B, we start off with Bad Company, the song on the album by the band, all bearing the same name. This was all inspired, that the band name and the album and the song were all inspired by I think it was a Jeff Bridges Western that they had seen advertisements for, and so they kind of got the title there. And when writing the song Bad Company, Paul Rodgers kind of went for that stark out west lawless vibes. Excuse me. But he wasn't the only writer on the song. Simon Kirke helped him with a few lines, and it's just, it's an iconic song. Even if it didn't really chart, despite being released as a single, to me it's their most iconic song. Maybe it's because it has their name in it, which, incidentally, Paul Rodgers thought that would be a good idea. He wasn't really sure if any other bands had sort of like written their own theme song, which, to my knowledge, the only other artist I can think of that did that would be Bo Diddley with his song Hey Bo Diddley. But for the most part, it's kind of a unique flex, which was pretty cool, and the song is way cooler than that even. It's got, this is the other song I was mentioning earlier, that Boz has that sort of cool plucking on his bass. It's, with a kind of twangy sound. It's hard to describe. I'm not good with musical terminology, but if you listen to this and also listen to Ready for Love, you'll probably hear what it is I'm trying to describe. Also, another interesting aspect of Bad Company musically is that in the vein of Stairway to Heaven, there's a delayed introduction of electric guitar and drums, which, of course, like it does in Stairway, makes their entrance into the song even more dramatic. Like, they just crash in Bad Company, and it's great. Like, everything's, it kind of feels like you go from this one lone gunslinger to a whole gang or posse of outlaws when those drums just burst in. It's a really great piece of arranging there. And it's the cool part about it, one of my favorite facts about this song, and probably facts about anything off this entire album, is that the vocals were recorded out in a field in the middle of the night under the moonlight, which just adds to the overall vibe of the song anyway. So their engineer, Nevison, the guy who I mentioned who also engineered The Who's Quadrophenia, suggested that they do it out in the field. It took 3 hours to like wire and mic everything up so Paul could record the vocals outdoors in this field outside of Headley Grange. But as Paul Rodgers put it, the atmosphere was just cosmic, and, you know, you could tell even though the interview that I heard him say that in, it's like, you know, 40 years after the album came out, he's still kind of like starry-eyed over just the vibe that they hit when they recorded the vocals out in, you know, a field under a moonlit, you know, sky, and it was chilly. In fact, that's one of the fun parts is that the line at the tail end of the song of "and the cold wind blows" was totally an ad-lib. If you listen to an earlier recording of the song, which you can find on the deluxe edition of Bad Company, it's not there. It was tacked on because, well, it was cold outside, and Paul Rodgers was shivering and wanted to go inside. Fortunately for him, this song, in spite of 3 hours of prep time by the, you know, people setting up the equipment, only took one take to do. So he got to come in from the cold pretty quickly. But it's a great little haunting ad-lib at the end, that "the cold wind blows" line, which was not in earlier versions of the song and totally just came out because Paul was freezing his butt off in the middle of a field in the middle of the night recording a song. And that's dedication. Maybe that explains how they got this album done in only 10 days. I guess they didn't sleep. Clearly, if you're in the middle of a field at midnight, or whatever time of night it was. But other fun facts about Bad Company, the song, is that it was quoted at the beginning of Stephen King's novel Tower. But that's not the only spooky, gruesome association this song has. It's also used in an episode of Supernatural in the first season, and it's not fun like the other scene that I mentioned that they used Ready for Love for. It's a very gruesome, bloody scene, which I'm, you know, somewhat confused about people using this song in such, like, dark context. I'm like, it's kind of got a Band of Brothers feel to it to me, where it's like, you know, these Three Musketeer kind of dudes of the, you know, Wild West, rather than, you know, death and bloodshed. I'm like, no, they're cooler than that. But that's just me. So that would be Bad Company. Now, moving on to track number 6, which is The Way I Choose, which is one of my favorite songs off of the album. For one, it's like Ready for Love. It's got a lot of lyrical depth. In fact, to me, it even surpasses Ready for Love, because it kind of explores, like, the nuances of, like, wanting love, but also kind of being gun-shy of it and gun-shy of vulnerability. It talks about what I refer to as crippling independence, something I suffer from. So, and how that, like, gets in the way of, you know, relationships. Like, so there's all the things that, you know, are discussed in the song about, like, you know, I don't ask no favors, and, you know, the independence vibe comes off really strong, which you can only be so independent and have a successful relationship, sadly. Anyways, so to me, I like the nuance of the song, and Mick Ralphs just plays some beautiful, like, minimalist guitar. Like, if you listen to the song and you're listening for the guitar, you'll realize that there's not a lot of it, but it's just very wonderfully crafted with how it's arranged, and it just fits the mood and everything perfectly. Like, not every song needs a guitar solo or some big, heavy, you know, power chords thing going, and it's Mick's guitar in this song is really, like, stand out beautiful. And if you listen to the deluxe edition of the, or rather the version of this song on the deluxe edition, with the false start, I find that probably one of the most accurate pictures of Paul's Free voice versus his Bad Company voice. Because if you listen to his work with Free, like, obviously, All Right Now sounds nothing like Bad Company. You know, even Can't Get Enough of Your Love doesn't really sound like All Right Now. So you sort of get a picture of the two of those in this outtake version with the false start, because that version of The Way I Choose, Paul's voice is like, it starts out before the false start, or rather during the false start, before they start over again. It's got the free sound to it, where it's that earthy, bluesman kind of sound. And then after the false start, it gets a lot smoother. In the second version of it on that track is a lot more smooth sounding. It's more like a smooth blues versus, the rough, really not gravelly, but, very much more coarse sounding vocals that Paul Rodgers did more often in Free and less often in Bad Company. So I think it's a really cool contrast to be able to hear it in like the same track versus having to go listen to a Free song and go listen to a Bad Company song. It sort of shows you the growth and progress of his voice from the one style to the other as he started his journey with Bad Company. The Way I Choose is also a great slow dance song, and it's made even more so that way by the fact that there is a saxophone in it. All good slow dance songs have a saxophone, right? I guess. I don't know. I've never slow danced, but I assume that they do. They tend to. At least if I'm picking out songs that I would slow dance to. But, moving on, which was written by Mick Ralphs, and is just a road trip kind of song. It was their second single off the album. The first one being Can't Get Enough of Your Love. And it placed number 19 on the Billboard. But it was, Moving On to just such a groovy road trip kind of song, like I was saying. It's got really good guitar, and it was written fairly early on as well. I'm not sure if Mick wrote it when he was in Mott the Hoople or just after him and Paul Rodgers had gotten together with the idea of collaborating. But lovely road trip anthem. Some people see it as a ode to the roadies, or an anthem for the roadies to identify with, which I can kind of see too. The roadies need more songs than just The Loadout by Jackson Browne. Roadie representation. Are you with me? But anyways, that's Moving On. So Moving On to the final track on the album, which is Seagull, and it's a total gear shift. It's yet again, if you watch the Bad Company documentary for the 40th anniversary, Paul Rodgers, who wrote Seagull, is kind of bragging about the variety of songs that exist on this album. Start to finish, you've got Can't Get Enough of Your Love to Seagull. There's a pretty broad range in there. And, Seagull's a very soft, it's just an acoustic guitar. I don't even think there's any, percussion on it whatsoever. It's just Paul with an acoustic. He wrote the song on a beach, and it's a very thoughtful song. It's almost a little depressing depending on what you see the seagull as a metaphor for. From the lyrics, it seems like the seagull could reasonably be considered a metaphor for death. So it's not an uplifting, rock-steady kind of banger, to be sure. Now, to discuss the couple of outtakes and B-sides that appeared in the deluxe edition of this album, which you can find on Spotify or YouTube and all those places. The one, which was the B-side for Can't Get Enough of Your Love, which was Little Misfortune, which I love. This is one of my favorite, songs, especially of the less played, less well-known Bad Company songs. It was written by Rodgers and Ralphs, and it's just a really fun play on the English language. Maybe as a former English major, I'm partial to things that have fun with the language. But it's also fun because it's almost got a bit of a funk sound to it. It's just just a smattering of funkiness to it, and, who doesn't love a little bit of funk every now and then, so long as it's in their music and not the smell of their socks. But it's really got a fun vibe to it. I enjoy it, but it's also got this really cool harmony break in it as well, which is, adds a bit of, nuance and uniqueness to it. Otherwise it'd just kind of be another middle-of-the-road rock and roll piece. But it pairs really well with Can't Get Enough of Your Love as the B-side. It complements it very well. You can definitely tell why one's the A-side and one's the B-side, but they go together like wine and cheese. The next song, which was the B-side for Moving On, which was the second single off the album, is Easy on My Soul, which Paul Rodgers originally wrote when he was with Free. In fact, you can listen to at least one or two versions from his time with Free that exist, in addition to the couple of versions that are in the deluxe edition of Bad Company. So you can kind of see how the song grew and developed over time. And it's just a, kind of chill piece. It's a little bit, it's not slower melodically, but it's definitely softer than some of the other songs. It's got a really kind of interesting piano hook to it, which I enjoy, and it has this feeling of motion, kind of like a brisk moving stream or river or creek. It just kind of feels like something's in motion, which of course makes it an excellent B-side for Moving On, because Moving On, as we discussed, is a road trip anthem and definitely a song about motion. So Easy on My Soul, as it's arranged in its B-side format, is a great complimentary song to Moving On as the B-side. Now to the outtake, which was Superstar Woman, which is another song that I like. And maybe if I'm I have a list of rock and roll aliases I could go by. I could be Little Misfortune, Superstar Woman. No, just kidding. Ramona. But Superstar Woman is a fun song. It's kind of, nifty, having a song written from that perspective of a guy with a celebrity crush versus, the typical, fangirl. This is the fanboy song. And it was an outtake in spite of the engineer Nevison really enjoying the song and kind of wishing it had been on the album. But given Paul wrote it, he was able to later just stick it on his debut solo album, Cut Loose, which incidentally is a really good album. Paul plays all the instruments on it in addition to singing, and it's a really fun album. I love a couple of the songs off of it, like Talking Guitar Blues, and it's not See You in the Morning, but there's a song about the morning, and it's a good song too. So if you really get into Paul Rodgers, check out that debut solo album, and you'll hear a later version of Superstar Woman than the one that you hear on the deluxe edition of Bad Company, obviously. And that brings us to the end of Bad Company, deluxe edition or otherwise. And a little bit of a perspective on the album is, in hindsight, it's not just considered, a top album of the 70s and of all time in the genre of rock. It was commercially and critically, received well at the time it came out. There's a story, yet again, in that documentary where the editor for Time magazine's, music, portion, the album had just came out, and they were enthusiastically talking about it to somebody at a party, someplace where they weren't, obliged to talk about it if they didn't want to. So unprompted enthusiasm immediately after it came out. It's truly one of those albums that you could call it, an instant classic, and that wouldn't be too cliche. It was an instant classic. There's not really a bad song on it, and all but maybe one or two are kind of rockin' songs that really make you want to get up and move. So it's that old school rock and roll sound, not overburdened with long solos. Not that I don't love me a good guitar solo, just saying there. Don't know if, my walls may have ears and they may report back to Jimmy Page. I love a good long guitar solo. All 45 minutes of Dazed and Confused. But it is nice to have just sort of simple songs, the punk part of me likes that. And Bad Company, just had simple, good, well-crafted songs as we've sort of went over. And this album, maybe even more so than all the others, because there's really not a flat song on this. They're all pretty lively, and, I think the ambience that came with being recorded at Headley Grange helped with it. Also, one final fun note about Headley Grange, because if you're listening to the deluxe edition, there's a track on it just called Studio Chat, and the guys in Bad Company are joking about hearing a dog, and then I think Simon sort of imitates dog barking at the end. But it's funny because it only confirms that there was a bunch of dogs hanging out at Headley Grange. Maybe the dog barking in the background before Simon imitates it was a black one? Maybe not. We don't know. All we know is that this album rocks so hard on all the tracks, and the tracks that aren't hard rockers provide a nice respite. It's kind of like Jimmy Page talks about with the light and shade of music. Not everything can be blasting your ears off. Occasionally you need a little bit of a soothing break so that the next ear-blasting party anthem rock and roll song hits you with more impact than a whole album of just rockers. So, go rock steady, rock on, ramble on, be kind to each other, and I will talk to y'all next week with more fun facts about Mr. Paul Rodgers. Next week I'll probably be discussing an album or the general overview of the band Free, which was his first major band. I know it kind of went out of order, but I figured most people know Paul Rodgers' work from Bad Company, so I'd start with the known and work into the more obscure. We'll probably end with his solo career or The Law, so look forward to that, and I will talk to y'all more next week.